All right, welcome to another episode of Not Investment Advice. We've got the NIA boys here today. Trung Phan, Jack Butcher, Bilal Zaidi. Boys, let's get straight into this one. This is for the hardcore people who've been with us since the beginning, been asking us questions all the time on Twitter, at Telegram. We got an AMA episode. Every time we do this, people really love it. So let us know what you think of this one.
I don't know what's more ironic. People coming on giving investment advice and not investment advice, or us giving advice on not investment advice.
There's no advice here, only no opinions.
Yeah, no advice. This is just, I'm just telling you what I've done in my life as a cautionary tale.
There you go, exactly.
What not to do, exactly.
All right, boys, I think we got a lot. I'm just going to go straight into these. And for people who didn't get a chance to submit, make sure you're in the Telegram group. It's in the show notes below. That's where we always ask people to submit questions. We've got a few questions from last time as well that we didn't get to, so we're just going to pepper them in, and let's just get straight into it. This one was from Callum talking about tribalism in crypto. It was a follow-up to the conversations we just had with Michael Saylor and Tetranode. We had a few comments like this, but Callum asked, what's your honest assessment view on the tribalism in the crypto community? It sounds like it lends more credibility to the corporations, exchanges who then end abstracting away all this fighting from the regular consumer. So essentially, what do you think of all the infighting, the religious stuff we've talked about, Shia, Sunni, Protestant, Catholic going on in crypto, ETH versus Bitcoin? What do you guys reckon?
Who's going, Trung? I'll go.
Yeah.
One thing I think it maybe is indicative of, I hate to say the cliche, we're still early, but the any like nascent technology or any nascent idea is like the ideological battleground is the first place of conflict, I think. And that's like, because all of this stuff is being discussed remotely, globally, on social, like all of the tactics that people use to get your attention in every industry, field, whatever it might be, kind of devolve to not necessarily name calling, but definitely like more extremely packaged points of view. Does that make sense? Like the arguments tend to just devolve into, and we're kind of, I don't even know how much further it can go at this point, but we're at what feels like some fairly far ends of the extreme argumentative points, right? Like even the last couple of guests we've had on the show have had some pretty aggressive analogies, shall we say, that when we talked about Bitcoin and the like biblical similarities in the conception and participation in the Bitcoin ecosystem. But at the same time, those points have had to get more and more like controversial to maintain narrative share, I think. And that's like an unfortunate consequence of the internet as the only real field of discussion for this thing. Like an internet native currency asset, blah, 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 what's going to come with that now is the way discourse happens on the internet. And if you can't make something controversial enough to get attention, it's worth basically nothing anyway, right? Like unless it's like a commodity that's already been adopted, like to get people to care about something, it feels like that's the nature of the conversation and the mechanics of Twitter in particular that encourages that kind of ridiculousness. And I think we've proven it out with our last few episodes that like the people that are dominating the narrative in either or any space are the ones that are putting a stake in the ground and saying something very extreme.
Yeah.
Dude, I just want to say how much I love Jack bringing up the idea of just to keep the narrative attention, like just to be on the playing field, you just have to go. I mean, it's well known in politics, right? Is when you're starting the political journey, you take the most extreme position possible. Like in the United States in the primaries, it's because you have to win for your party. But then when you go to the main election and the field has whittled down, you can quote unquote, you can go back to the middle a bit, right? But that's such a great point about what's happening. I mean, let's just call a spade a spade. We saw a couple of comments in the Telegram group about how two of our last 4 or 5 guests, obviously Michael Saylor, Bitcoin Maxi, and then Tetranode, effectively an ETH Maxi. We had a couple comments where they weren't super happy with how that kind of turned into basically a lot of mudslinging, right? And with what I would say is that, yes, there's definitely some mudslinging. Our intention isn't just to bring people on to sling mud and like, hey, let's hope this gets clipped and it gets thrown on Twitter. Although it did get clipped and Vitalik did reply, but that wasn't the intention. I think both of those were super long talks. 90% of them, outside of kind of these straight up attacks, were like, there's actually some quite insightful and a lot of insightful stuff here. Obviously gets drowned out a bit by the I'm not even going to say what was said. If you listen to a lot of those episodes, you know what happened, the clippable parts. The last thing I want to say about that was there's this amazing paper about how Twitter changes communication. It's from a philosopher in Utah. It's a Vietnamese philosopher, actually. I'm really embarrassed that I don't know his name, and I'm too lazy to pull it up now. But his whole point was he basically wrote a paper explaining how Twitter changes the way you communicate. And his thesis is, I mean, we know it changes how we communicate, but he actually really framed it in a very digestible way. He's like, okay, if you go on Rotten Tomatoes, this is what Rotten Tomato does. For a critic of a film movie, it's either thumbs up or thumbs down, essentially, right? So and the way that's kind of translated into the Rotten Tomato scores is if a movie has 51% like positive reviews from the reviewers, that gets like a positive, right? That's not a Rotten Tomato. That's like the tomato. And what he's saying is Twitter does the same thing in that all the nuance is literally taken out. It's like the score that you're given is a retweet or a fave, and you're not getting either of those with like well thought out and argued points, right? So and it's not just that. The content itself, but the other thing that he mentions, and I'd love for you guys to noodle on this actually, because we're pretty big Twitter users. He says, even as a user of Twitter, you're given so few tools to actually express how you feel about a piece of content. So as an example, a funny meme that you look at for 1 second and you press the fave button or retweet, all you've expressed is that meme was able to make you laugh for 2 seconds. But if there's a tweet where you think like a week later, you actually think back to it, it's like, damn, that was like super deep. It doesn't reflect like that level of changing your consciousness, right? So the communication that happens is completely flat.
Trump, you're talking about the threads that say there are 8 billion people in the world and
no,
they don't use oxygen.
Even like
they don't use oxygen properly, and this is how to make the most out of breathing.
Right? Those things go super viral, but they give you that instant hit, like the dopamine hit, right? You feel like you've learned something or gotten a useful tool.
No, I'm messing around, obviously.
I didn't realize you're shit posting me right now. But so it flattens the communication for the content creator and also the content consumer, right? So like, as a consumer of content, you don't even like, you're being taken away from trying to find depth in anything because you're getting this instant dopamine hit. So all I'm trying to say about that is, Jack brought up a great point. These crypto battles are happening on Twitter, and Twitter naturally flattens out the landscape of what content can be created and also what kind of content appeals to people. And TikTok's doing the same thing, right? It's like people are like, like Bilal's like, if it's not 30 seconds and like tightly cut, I'm not watching it.
Man, try watching a movie. Have you watched a movie recently?
Oh my dude,
we're gonna get onto that.
Have you tried to watch a movie without looking at your phone? It's impossible.
I went the other day to the park where they did like an outdoor movie, and I kind of knew it was like a Disney movie that I knew I didn't want to watch, but I just was being nice. So I kind of turned up, and to me, it's like if it's not something I really want to watch, it's no point me going, because my attention span is not going to handle it. And I put my phone away, and I was like 20 minutes in, I'm like, man, I'm so bored. And I just thankfully it started raining. But Trung, I was just going to add to what you said there. My opinion on this question, to remind people, the question is about tribalism and crypto. My opinion is we've always had tribes. We always will have tribes. It's just more, accentuated now. And we've kind of gone from, especially in the West, we've become probably, the trend has been we've become less religious, but there's plenty of religious people in the States, but, on average, that has become less of a prominent thing. And we've kind of replaced it with like veganism versus keto, CrossFit versus whatever, and like crypto is the same. It's like Bitcoin crew versus ETH crew, and like to your original point, like my whole intent with anything we put out on the pod is always like most people are pretty much welcome on the show, and even like specifically with Tetrano when he talked about Pomp, who's we know Pomp, he's our boy, but like my instinct there was not to like interrupt him and be like, hey man, like that's our friend. It was just like let him talk. It's like it's our platform for him to share his opinion. And like as long as someone's not like extra rude, I think he did say something that was a little rude about Pomp, but it's not that crazy. We're all adults. I'm sure if Pomp was there, he would be able to take that and be able to like respond in his own way.
If anybody can take mudslinging, it's like
exactly.
He's an expert, like Pomp.
And so that was kind of my feeling on that. But like that's kind of my point. It's like we've always had these things, we've just replaced them with things like that. So even people who are atheists and they're like, oh man, I hate when religious people are like this, they don't realize they're like the crazy Democrat that's only watching CNN.
Wokeism is a religion.
Or the Fox News person who is like, close the border because of this crazy thing I saw on YouTube or whatever. And my point to all of this is like, when you've got a world which is dominated by, one-liners and the short attention span, which also impacts me, that is what you're going to get. You're going to get the extreme stuff. You're going to have Andrew Tate surfacing on TikTok with crazy one-liners that gets him banned. So that's kind of the stuff which does stand up. But honestly, it's the reason I love long form and podcast is because it's the closest we get to actually having nuance and a real discussion. So that is why there's 1/10 of the audience on podcast. But to me, that's more important as someone who makes stuff. Is like I'd rather spend time creating stuff for the 10% of people versus 100% of people who are just gonna like and retweet my stuff or whatever.
Exactly, it's that Twitter, like the flattening of the experience, right?
Exactly.
You're not gonna walk away from these Google plugin threads and be like, yo, I'm reevaluating my life. But you might listen to a 4-hour Rogan podcast and be, yo.
I mean, seriously, I would actually add that to one of the questions we've got coming up on books and movies. I'll add podcasts into that because I think honestly there's been a few of those.
Wait, right, quickly, I'm done here, but last thing I'll say, the philosopher's name is C. T. Nguyen, Vietnamese cat. Really, really good philosopher. I butchered his thesis. So it's we should just get him on the pod. He was actually on Ezra Klein's pod and crushed it. But
nice.
He's a man.
We should. I was just gonna add one more resource, not investment advice, but you guys ever read the Basecamp book on
Rework?
Which one? Rework?
Getting Real. Is it called Getting Real?
I haven't read that one.
Because he's had a couple,
or it's like a series of blog posts or something, but they have a chapter in it called Pick a Fight. And it's like just the marketing 101. Yeah. It's like choose an enemy and go after them. And that's like, I went to Italy 3 years ago and went to the Colosseum, and you're standing in there and you're just like, this was full up every day with people. I mean, we've gotten a lot more civilized when you think about it. It's not like people ripping organs out of each other for entertainment.
It's just tweeting them instead.
Just tweeting,
you're still destroying people's lives, right? Like you can still destroy people's lives via tweet.
Yeah, I mean,
you're just not. It looks more civilized.
Different way.
In a different way. I wouldn't compare it to getting dismembered in a.
No, totally. But I mean, the far extreme of
I almost spat my tea out there. Sorry,
it's like the far extreme of social communication does devolve into.
For sure, yeah. I know, this is a sensitive topic, Trung. We'll move on.
Okay, let's not dig into it. But the last thing I'll say is that to your point about the Basecamp guys, they did it perfectly with
the email thing,
Apple, right? They hit it perfectly. They called out Apple for blocking their email app. They hit the news cycle. I mean, that was just...
They've done it so many times.
Games did a similar thing, right? With the App Store.
Epic, yeah.
Epic Games, sorry, yeah.
Remember that on Basecamp, they did with the Google search as well. They were like, we're having to bid on our own brand term and this is evil. And like, that's a whole hour discussion there, so we don't need to go down. But Google, it was like, so they played it to
as soon as Google's evil, it's like, guys, let's not discuss former Google employee Bilal. Like, guys, listen, let's not talk about that. Okay.
Comes on, man. Suit comes on.
But it's people love watching a fight too, right? It's like why people love watching reality TV. Just like the realer and dirtier and messier and like uglier a situation, you can just be like a voyeur on. Like people are all over that.
Well, Jack, it's like in a school playground. in a school playground, both of you remember, anytime there's a fight, everyone's like, oh my God, fight. You run over and you know you're not supposed to, but you're there. That's naturally what happens.
Okay, I got one last content. If Jack gave this unsolicited content recommendation, I'm going to give one to you. I want to find it for you guys. There's a clip of Sean Hannity on YouTube. So the actual real life clip is 30 seconds. He brought on a lib and proceeded to tear that individual apart. But somebody did a analysis of the tear apart, and they made a 30-second video into like 10 minutes, and they just pointed out like the hundreds of different ways the Fox News, when they bring on an enemy, they just frame it so that person looks so bad, and Sean Hannity just tears them apart, like editing techniques. We'll put those in the show notes. Yeah, it's wild.
It's not to get too heady, but it's the same idea as like putting on theater, right? It's like it is a theatrical performance where you have people sitting there that you know their disposition, and you're going to play to that disposition or try and influence their disposition. Right. It is it's all theater.
There we go. All right, boys, we've got to move it on because we got plenty to get through. But a great question from Callum. All right, this one is from Jeff. Jeff asked a similar question last time we didn't get to, and he asked a revised question now. So his question was the easiest online business opportunities, most worthwhile coding languages to learn when starting from zero. I don't know if any of us are qualified on the coding part, though maybe you guys might be. But the question is really around, like, if you're starting from scratch, online business opportunities. I think, Jack, you probably have something in mind since you have a whole curriculum on this.
The stuff that I've written about is quite specific to like taking a skill that you've built in an environment that might be offline or less online and turning that into an asset that can change the relationship you have with the business, right? Like if you're a designer, if you're an editor, if you're a writer, you can get leverage through publishing and creating assets that are bigger than you and work around the clock. Therefore, you know, to a hammer, everything looks like a nail. So I have a view to how that is a viable path. If I was starting again, I'm trying to think what I would do. Media businesses, I think, are very hard now. Like Trung's probably got a good point of view on this, but like growing a newsletter to a monetizable size, I think is a real difficult task, not impossible, but you have to get extremely narrow with your focus. One of my favorite examples of this is there's a Substack newsletter, I think, that writes about Amazon, just about what Amazon is doing. And you imagine there are tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people that are so materially invested in Amazon that they will pay you to teach them about what's happening with that. But a lot of people start way too wide. We could go into, I mean, it feels like a whole episode. You could talk about it. On the development side, I think that Solidity is not a bad idea right now. Like there is a absolute dearth of talent in that world because of obviously the amount of hype that was created around it last year. But I think there's like a lot of serious and interesting projects that you can get involved in. And there's a lot of companies that are just trying to staff that capability, even in an exploratory capacity. So I think if you have a decent working grasp of Solidity, there's like plenty of opportunities out there. As for other coding stuff, I think beyond even like learning languages, I think getting really competent in a particular tool that has like advantages that span a lot of different opportunities, like a Webflow or a Framer where you can...
Yeah, I was going to say like a no-code sort of tool, you mean?
Yeah. Like Webflow is shout out to whoever's building Webflow because they're building some really incredible features into this no-code platform where you can build basically anything. You can build an e-commerce website, you can build membership websites, you can build all of these things that used to cost. I worked in agency businesses that would charge $10 million to build a site that now costs you $30 a month to build. It's just crazy how fast comes up. And like a really focused agency business, I think is still a great opportunity. Like if you can publish a portfolio of work or even go out there and do permissionless projects for things that you're interested in, and then take 80% of that work, reskin the last 20%, and go out and sell that as a service. Use a platform like Twitter to get the attention of people that you want to work with. I still think there's an enormous amount of opportunity out there. It's just what we're seeing now is like people go and try and go mega wide and do the like how to get sleep threads. And then you're just stuck out there with nothing, right? Like you may be able to tie that back to something. And in like, there are probably a few great examples where that really works. Like say you're selling a mattress or something. I think that makes a lot of sense. And all you talk about is sleep. But I think there's a lot of non-specific, just volume and audience building to a point where, you know, there's not enough of a focus to turn that into something that has like economic velocity. You get what I mean? Like, unless you have a really specific, like in that case, I think you'd go with someone who has a really specific personality or way of communicating versus somebody who could just write viral stuff. But even though that is a skill set that you can sell too, like the ability to help other people understand how to get whatever it is they want to say into the Twitter algorithm and amplify it in a certain way. It's just so much of it is like the 10 years of grinding out specific stuff and then finding a little nook and just jamming yourself into that. Not the most actionable answer, but I have loads of stuff that you can read for free on how to do it.
Plug it here, mate. You got. I think people already know about this one.
URL, dude.
Permissionless Apprentice. Just Google that. It's first result.
There we go.
Did you have to pay Google for that?
No.
Jack, did you have to pay Google for that?
I own that keyword.
All right, that was great, Jack. I have some thoughts too, but Trung, anything you want to share?
Yeah, I'll do a quick one. I agree with Jack that the idea of starting a solo media business, it sounds straightforward enough, right? You have all the tools there. And even the advice of going niche, right? Like this is like, we've talked about this before. If there's something as simple as, let's say you actually have 10 years in the plumbing space and you're like, hey, I want to make plumbing sexy, throw in some memes. Like that's actually a formula a lot of people are doing, right? They take a B2B business and like, let's just add memes and people will want to read me all the time. The two things I will say is this. The first one is if you don't think you can do that for 5 years, don't do it. Don't start. And the reason is this, and Jack touched on it. It takes a very long time to build things to scale. Like, listen, we know like our buddy Sean grew his crypto newsletter to 6 figures, but he's able to put paid behind that because it wasn't a niche. But having said that,
and they're doing a great job, but they're also starting with him.
And he already has a platform himself, right?
And Twitter, etc.
Yeah, he already has a platform.
He started from zero, but he's built it up one step at a time.
Well, to your point, he actually didn't start from zero because he's already known quantity.
No, I mean before that he started from zero. I mean,
fair enough, fair enough. But what I'd say is like, so a lot of people kind of like that model where you go down an industry and you can potentially put paid behind it because you can target people for that industry. Industry Dive, which does B2B newsletters, recently sold for 500 million, but it took them 10 years to do it. And audience building in that kind of that vein it's not easy.
Who bought them, Tron? Do you know?
A large events business. I forgot the name here. Hold on a second.
500 million.
Informa. Informa bought them.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, that's right.
So what I'll say is like, you can build, I mean, you can even build these solo ones that if you wanted to, make job boards and do ads just specific for the industry. But what I'm saying is like, if you don't think you can do it for 5 years, like at a minimum, like the reality is you have to
really enjoy doing that.
It's because you will burn out, right? Like I know a number of Substack newsletters that kind of went down this route. One was for the renewable industry or clean energy. I forgot what it was. It's one of the top newsletters actually. And then she wrote in Substack, the writer of it. We should actually post it. She explained why she gave up on it, which is kind of big. She had a lot of paying subscribers. And she's just like, I hit a point where I stopped enjoying it and it became worse than a job. It was like, I dreaded doing it, right? And I'll give myself as an example. It's like, I'm to Jack's point about if you're too general, it's like a weakness. It's like, I'm fortunately enough, I've gone to the scale where being general can work, right? It's like, and people are willing to listen to me talk about anything.
But you're also not general in the way that all your stuff goes through the filter of humor and your writing style.
Right. It's Trung. The converse is it's Trung writing. So it actually isn't general. It's 101, right? It's like, if you want to hear my voice, cool. If not, tell me to kick rocks. It's fine, right? But to your point is, I've been writing for 10 years. Like I wrote a blog 6 years, 7 years ago that nobody read, right? Like I've been doing this nonstop in some capacity for a decade. And for me, it's not even a question. Am I going to be doing something like I'm doing now in the next 10 years? Yes. The answer is 100% yes. So that answers the first part for me is like, if you're not ready to do it for 5 years, like don't even bother, right? And the other thing that's tricky with these niches is if they go out of style, you're also hitching yourself and hoping that whatever industry you marry yourself to can grow and will have exit opportunities. Unless, of course, you believe you can do it forever. And a lot of people don't, right? Who wants to do something, unless you're Ben Thompson with Stratechery, but he's gotten so big that, and tech's such a big thing that he gets kind of right about anything he wants. But if you're thinking about doing a plumbing newsletter for 20 years, like, I don't know, man, it sounds tough.
Yeah. And that was great, Trunk. I'll just add to that. I would 100% agree that like the problem, I think this is a good question, but it's also difficult to answer without knowing the person and their context, what they 100%. Like, what their skills are. Like that's really the better answer. So like, you know, this is just me sharing my opinion based on the little I know about you asking this and trying to make it applicable for a broader audience. So I would say it depends on the sort of person. So if you're the sort of person who just really wants to make money, right, there is a completely different playbook to someone who wants to spend 8 hours a day working on something they love, or 10 hours a day, or whatever it ends up being. And that is a key. Like if you think of this as a decision tree where you go, like that's two completely different ends of the spectrum, in my opinion. And like I haven't met many people who truly just stay around forever because the money motivates them. So after a certain point, it becomes very difficult just to keep motivating yourself. Honestly, the two exceptions, I would say, like the ones I've spoken to and I don't know them that well, we all know them as well, is Sam Pa and Sean, right? Like when you speak to them about like stuff, they'll talk about the money first. They'll talk about the kind of opportunity, and like they're amazing at breaking that down, and they will do whatever it takes to get there. I'm not saying they don't care about the things they're doing. They do as well. But I think people like that will start with, oh, this is a great way to make a $10 million a year business or a $100 million business. So whereas someone like me, like I prefer to say, like, what I've interviewed all these people who've done stuff like that, right? And some of them become billionaires. And what I've seen amongst all of them is by the end of it, they were like, oh, I really hated this part, or after all of this, it wasn't what I expected. And long story short, my take is you kind of want to spend time every day doing the things you want to do. So right now I'm optimizing for like freedom of time. That means choice. So that means if I'm spending time 2 hours today talking to you guys, or if it's doing 5 hours of other sort of work, or even having a job, those are things I'm choosing to do. And that is what makes me most happy while hitting a minimum amount of income that I want to hit. And that is okay for my stage of life, and I can afford to do it. So it really just depends on that person. If you're saying like the easiest thing to do, I still think the easiest thing you can do is learn a skill and learn to monetize it. And that ideally would be a B2B skill. So whether that is literally, design work, programming, like you said, content, writing, creating great content, or in my case, paid advertising, which is not that sexy, but every business in the world is pretty much doing some sort of paid ads. And one thing I learned last recession, there was a guy who was like 10 years older than me, and I kind of laughed when he said it then, but now I agree with him. And he said something along the lines of, like, in a recession, well, basically in your career, you want to stay where the money is. And I was like, what is he talking about? Does that mean me earning money? And he's like, no, when you're servicing a business where they're making money, whether it's sales, marketing, any growth, basically, they're always going to carve out a budget for you. And that was his opinion on a job, right? So, but if you look at like paid ads, for example, that is something you can literally learn in a few months quite well, test it out, get experience, go work somewhere for a little while. And you can then start freelancing on the side and just picking up clients for $2,000, $5,000, $10,000 a month, like easily, and make a good living doing that. And so I think that's a great place to start, especially if you're in your like 20s. And there's going to be a need for that skill for a long time. I think that's a great
recommendation. I just want to add one thing to Bilal's point. Is it's such a great call you're making here, is because it's so clear what the ROI is, right? They're like, listen, we're going to pay this person $3,000 a month, and then we'll give them some on top of performance. But like, they know they're putting it in and what they're getting out, right? Like, Bilal, you know this game.
Yeah, you've got
it's
a skill that
yeah.
directly can help them make more money. And you, especially in digital stuff, you can like literally show them the numbers. You spent X amount, it resulted in X amount. And the other thing is you have to think like where their budget's coming from. In most organizations, they have either an in-house person or an agency. And I think there's a really interesting arbitrage right now of, you know, they're used to spending 20, 30 grand sometimes on an agency a month. And you're saying to them, like, this has been my pitch for the last 4 years. I'm more experienced than the person you're going to get an agency. I'm better than them with this experience. I'm going to charge you just a little bit less, but I'm going to be much better. And that's worked, right? And so at the same time, you need to back it up. Obviously, you can't just like pitch them something and not know what you're doing.
They're like, Bilal, what's your experience? Like, have you ever heard of the Bling King Empire?
Yeah, exactly.
Bilal, hold on. We're going to need to see the CV here. Okay, Charity Water, cool, Google. What is this? Bling King Empire.
Yeah. Well, that's 100% true. But anyway, so yeah, that would be my recommendation for certain type of person is like pick one of those skills and see if it kind of marries with your strengths. Like I like numbers. I like thinking about marketing. I like business naturally. We talk about it for hours every week. So if you take me in a room where I'm having to talk about marketing and growth, like I naturally will feel comfortable doing that. Other people hate doing that. So they need to focus on what they're interested in. Maybe it's a more creative field, the way Jack's done it. So that's kind of, yeah, my advice for that.
So to summarize, Jack says Webflow type things. He's like a no-code apps. Bilal said, start the Arsenal review, a website blog for soccer. No, Bilal said paid advertising is that's a great skill, actually. I didn't see that one coming, Bilal. That was a curveball. That was a great one.
Also, I'll add one more thing is like, if you're in an agency business and you don't want to do like highly technical stuff, lean into the ego of other people. People will pay to make themselves look good. So there's there's a lot of ways that makes sense. Like people pay 30 grand to get like 5 articles written about them to get verified on Instagram. Just crazy outlays of cash to satisfy the ego. And there's lots of different ways you can tap into that idea.
And I'm just going to add one last thing for specifics of areas that are growing, which I think are interesting for people to think about if you're starting today. Like paid ads, of course, is still, you know, thriving, even though it's turbulent because of the recession, which is a question we have later. But if you think of a lot of growth coming from like TikTok, or, you know, YouTube as well, but TikTok specifically, there's a need for people who create relationships with influencers or people with audiences and match them up with brands. That's like literally every brand is trying to work with those people. And it's really time consuming for them to go and identify the people, do the outreach, manage that, report on impressions, all that sort of stuff. That's something you can easily learn and then eventually hire people to replace you. And I think TikTok is really interesting just because it's blowing up. Every marketing executive is like, what's my TikTok strategy? Blah, blah, blah. And honestly, the influencer stuff still kind of works for a lot of people. So I would think less so about like, if you're coming at it from the angle of what's growing that I can like jump on this kind of wave, that is still growing very, very rapidly. All right, should we move on to the next question, boys? That was good. Great question from Jeff. I think we can do this one from Rohan next about storytelling and marketing. It's a little bit of a long question, but I'll try to read this quickly. How important of a skill is storytelling and marketing a product to consumers, attracting employees, raising funds, etc.? Two personalities that come to mind who have harnessed this skill to a large extent are Elon Musk and more recently Adam Newman. However, in my mind, storytelling can only go so far before customers, investors start to see past that. Would love to hear your comments. I think it's in our wheelhouse.
I think the answer is kind of already in the question, right? Like storytelling will get you the momentum to start something, and it will get you people married to your vision. But let's take Elon, for example. He's an incredible storyteller, obviously, in the way he frames, take SpaceX. He wants to, give humans a second planet, right? That's the story. That's the overarching story for SpaceX. Now, if you buy into that story, you're willing to do a lot, right? You're willing to work 100 hours a week. And he does that himself. So he's not asking anybody to do something that he otherwise wouldn't do. Now, I think to Rohan's point, where it gets tricky is, let's say you woo 100 of the world's top applied engineers to your business. Let's call it making space rockets. and the story was what wooed them, but you weren't doing the second part of that, which is working 100 hours a week, yeah, I think people are going to bounce, right? I think people are not going to believe that you believe the story. So that's a long way of saying, if you sell something, a company, a product on a story, but you yourself don't believe that story and it's reflected in your actions, I think to his point, everybody will see through that. Investors, customers, employees, and they'll bounce.
Yeah, it's kind of like what we were just saying. You got to back it up, obviously.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
But of course, yeah, go on.
Like Elon, he's working 100 hours a week, right? So that's the thing. Whereas Adam Newman, he was selling this vision, but a lot of the reality was that he was kind of just trying to get effing rich and quote unquote influential without having to pay the dues of what it takes to build a sustainable real estate business, right? I think that's the difference.
Jack, any thoughts, mate?
Yeah, I think that like the people that can do both are quite remarkable too, right? Like I think Trung's point about story being momentum and then execution depends on the complexity of the business too. Like if you're building rockets, there's obviously like the execution of that story is much more difficult than, even like any business that is much smaller than that, which a lot of us have perspective on and can give like actionable advice on building a business with a couple people. But if you're employing 20,000 people, that's a whole different game. Like there's just no way that you're executing on that grandiose story without an incredible amount of execution ability. So,
well, that's a founder manager thing, right? A lot of these founders don't end up managing the company. They get it to a certain point and they're great at storytelling. They're not great at the other part. So I think, again, it was in his question, right? Is like, what happens when it falls apart? It's like some people just don't have both skills.
Yeah. I think story is like kind of maybe, I don't know. I think there are people who, I can't think of an example of someone who's just amazing at telling stories and is not successful. Like if you're amazing at telling stories, you can basically stopgap everything else because you can tell the story to get the person to execute. Yeah. You can tell the story to get the capital. You could to me, it might not be, it may be sexier to be a rocket scientist, or it may be more difficult to become a rocket scientist even, but like the bar is lower to become a great storyteller. And it's like a more solid insurance policy. Like if you had to pick one of the two, and again, hammer nail situation here, then storytelling is covers your bases in many ways.
It's industry agnostic, right? You can tell a story about anything, like plumbing.
Yeah, and obviously in the wrong hands and unethically applied, that can be a recipe for fraud. So obviously tread carefully with that too. But as we've seen with all these like founder stories, the only difference between fraud and a successful business is kind of execution, right? And that's very hard to do, especially with like rockets or medical equipment or bridges or tunnels.
Elizabeth Holmes.
Well, that's the thing that people keep
Elon
asking,
Musk.
right? Is like, what's the difference between Adam Newman and Elizabeth Holmes? They both lied to investors. They both lied to customers. It's like the difference is that Elizabeth Holmes is working in the health field, right? And like giving people wrong diagnoses.
And to be fair, WeWork, like as much as it fell off since the top, but it's still a public company.
It's a business, right?
It's
he
a
created the category. It's the best name, like the brand name.
Yeah, they did do like something.
Uber
even
the things like that, right? They've just been pissing money away for years and years and years. But the service still, you wake up and open your phone, it still works.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. The last thing I'll say, I think you already kind of summarized it, boys. But the way I think storytelling is one word, and I think that's a better word to use. But the way I think of it in business specifically is someone creates something, another person or group promotes it and sells it essentially. And those are kind of like two big, obviously there's the operations and everything too, but like those are two of the most important parts, especially in tech. Like you've got the vision, you've got the Steve Wozniak and you've got the Steve Jobs. Yeah. Steve Jobs was probably a bit of both, but he was definitely storyteller first and foremost by the time it got to, the scale they got to. And so I think, like we said, both are important. You can't have one without the other. Like if you just create a great computer, but don't know how to tell the world about it, that's not going to work either in most cases. There are a few exceptions where it really did get out there, but most of the time, especially in 2022, you need to be able to tell a story, like you said. And that is, like you said, consumers, employees, investors, whatever, all the stakeholders of business, you need to be able to convince them. And in my opinion, that is the skill of an entrepreneur. So like that is that initial spark. They grow it to a certain stage. And then after that, like you said, sometimes Trung, you're not the same person to get to the next stage. You need to hire Eric Schmidt or a Sheryl Sandberg or whatever. But yeah, I think though that the way Rohan asked this question, he's saying like how important is it as a skill? I think if you were just like learning storytelling, but you'd had nothing to sell, I think you need to find something to sell, whether that's something yourself or for a company. And I find like a lot of people get really good at, like, they'll spend 100 hours learning copywriting, but then have nothing to like write about to sell, right? And so that's kind of the two parts to it. Is like you need to have something to sell in the first place.
Oh, copywriting is another great skill that we could have added to the
that's
one.
That's true, actually, especially right now. Yeah, cool. All right, next, should we go next question? We got another 25 minutes. Tyler asked this, the next $1 trillion company update. In 2021, you guys had a discussion about a next $1 trillion company and mentioned Square, Stripe, and others.
I think Coinbase was in there too. We Square, Stripe, Coinbase, and Shopify.
I think we were trying to like discuss the three.
Based on like in the 100 billion range.
Yeah, which one's hitting next?
Guys, here, hold on. Full disclaimer here. There were parameters of why we did those guesstimates, but still, I mean, I would still put Stripe and Square in that box, right? Like,
well, the question, just to clarify, the question people don't know is how was 2022 shifted those expectations given the macro climate and pricing of everything?
You know what? I'll say it hasn't, because the expectations would take those things a decade to get there, right?
Yeah, fair.
And what I mean it hasn't is, what was the thesis behind why we thought Square and Stripe would become $1 trillion companies? It's because 90% of the economy is still real world, right? It's not all e-commerce yet. It's not all digital. And as soon as that gets to 40, 50%, if it does, I'd expect that that's a very reasonable assumption to make.
When it does, Trung.
Yeah, when it does, I mean, they're going to be taking a rip off that business and they're facilitating that business, then yeah, it's still in the playbook. So I definitely keep Square and Stripe, or Block as it's called, Block and Stripe there. Shopify, I'm a little bit concerned actually. I'll tell you the things about Shopify that concern me. Not necessarily the drawdown that's happened, but it looks like Amazon might be able to stamp them out, right? There just might be a world where spinning up an e-commerce business is actually just not that profitable. And a lot of people just aren't going to be good enough at it. And at the end of the day, people are just going to go to Amazon. Because if you actually look at the DTC space, you can make a pretty credible argument that there hasn't actually been a great, sustainable DTC company. Like all these ones that went public
at a large scale.
They've all lost money.
I'd say like the smaller ones.
Yeah, the thing is like you can have like a bricks and mortars with online presence, but at the end of the day, is like, I mean, Jack runs a Shopify business, a digital one, but like if you ran a brick and mortar one or you had the ships, like that's a lot of stuff to deal with, and like how many are actually profitable? Especially after the Facebook ads business got completely demolished. I mean, that was a big part of Shopify getting destroyed, right? You used to be able to target profitably on Facebook and acquire customers. Now you can't. Facebook's rebuilding that business. They're just going to take them a long time to do it. But yeah, I mean, there's a world.
Sorry, I wouldn't say you can't completely, but it's become harder.
Oh yeah,
for sure.
It's more expensive. It's harder and more expensive.
It's more expensive. You can't target as well. But
Which,
you're right,
if you're running a Shopify business, you have thin margins. Yeah.
That's true. If you've got the right people on your team, then you know what's going on.
Trung's like, Trung, Trung, I do paid ad here's, man, and I can tell you right now, I can offer you for a little bit less money, but better performance.
Exactly.
So, what I'll say, so the last thought I had about that is there's a chance that Shopify might just get acquired before can you get to $1 trillion, right? Or 500 billion. Like Google or Facebook, it makes sense for them to acquire Shopify. And then the last one I'll throw in there before you guys, sorry for hijacking this one, but I think SpaceX easily will be $1 trillion business. Atoms is, as we alluded to just on the last question, is the hardest shit in the world. Launching and landing rockets is literally the hardest thing you could possibly do as a business, and they're doing it. And the Starlink moat is going to be massive. So yeah, I'll say that. I'll throw
Nice.
SpaceX in the ring. And that's not
That's
saying a lot. It's already
interesting,
valued at 150 billion. Yeah.
Yeah. Jack, anything to add there before we move on?
I'm just Googling something.
All right, while you're pulling up, I will say, yeah, I just agree with what you said. But I think Stripe is kind of a boring answer, but I think Stripe is pretty unstoppable, just the way they're set up, the momentum they have. I mean, long term, I don't see them really slowing down. But yeah, Jack, go for it, mate.
ByteDance.
There we go.
ByteDance,
yeah.
But the thing with ByteDance, they already got to about 500 million. So like, yeah, they're, and it depends on what happens with TikTok. Ultimately, I don't make Trunks say it again, but TikTok should be banned in the United States, or sell it to Walmart, sell it to Oracle as it originally was planned. TikTok should not be allowed to operate as a Chinese company. It's insane. It's wild to me that it's allowed to own a U.S. culture like that. And I know that they're working to assuage fears. But man, got to do what you got to do, right? The United States is a republic, has its own territories, and tit for tat, right? If you're going to ban everything in China, it makes sense in a way legally if you got to do it through courts to do the same.
Fair enough. All right, boys, so we move on because we've got quite a few more to get through as much as we can here. This one was from last time. Let's see if you guys want to answer it. Enigma Operator said, what are your physical routines? Do you take any supplements? How do you cope with stress or anxiety? You guys up for talking about it?
Yeah.
Just Red Bull, isn't it, for you, Trung?
Here we go.
I'll do it quick. Is like I drink a lot of caffeine, and drink a lot of caffeine.
Helps your stress and anxiety?
Yeah. No, because I'm tired in the mornings. I've been drinking way too much alcohol this summer. Alcohol really messes up my sleep. I think I'm probably going to go sober until next summer. It just does not work for my sleep. Those are the two main things. Nothing complicated. Drink a lot of water, do caffeine in the morning, and try to skip alcohol. That would be optimal for me.
Jack, what about you, mate? I know you got your PT sessions going.
I'm back in it, yeah. 4 days a week. I'm training now.
Killing it.
And trying to get my macros right. So I did like a did this nutritionist thing a few years ago and had a very militant macro situation, weighing food.
What was it like?
You're doing the weighing food stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I'm doing it right now. We'll talk about it in a sec. But go on, tell me what was the
broccoli
what
boys.
was the breakdown? Was it like
roughly at the end of it, I was eating like 210 grams of protein a day.
Jeez.
That's
75 grams of fat.
Killing it.
170 grams of carbs, yeah. So it's like 3,000 calories or something.
Dude, that's a lot of protein.
When you're training.
And you were putting
hard.
on weight. You were trying to grow, right? You're trying to put on muscle?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. And that, like, before that, you do an elimination thing, 1,500 calories, like on a list of like approved non-inflammation foods. And so the stuff it works amazingly well, but it's like, it has lifestyle and social implications. So I'm trying to get back to a more moderate version of that where I know it, I stick to it. If people are visiting or a couple nights a month, you go out and have a little,
on the lash, a couple
rowdy.
shandies.
Exactly, mate. But the baseline is kind of set now. So try and do that. And then I actually got the Whoop.
Oh,
thing.
yeah. We got that sent.
And I love it, but it's also like a huge mental
imposition.
When it
right?
says like, hey, by the way, you're feeling like shit today. Don't forget that. Sometimes it's like,
you're like, I was about to go hard.
No, but
right
use
now,
as an excuse is like, sorry, I can't take the kid anywhere today. Got to stay home and meditate
I'm
for
39% recovery today.
Celia, I need to meditate for the next 5 hours. Whoop told me.
Yeah, I'm getting 8 hours of sleep, boys. Everything's good.
This is the thing. It's not complicated, right? Cut alcohol and get 8 hours of sleep. That solves like 90% of the problems.
Time for a thread, boys. That's time
for a thread, right?
Don't drink 15 pints a week and go to bed on time.
That definitely helps. Have you guys got the Whoop? I've used the Aura Ring. I do use the Aura Ring. Like, it really crushes you. You'll see the impact of drinking on that. Like,
you'll be one beer or two beers.
Resting heart rate is elevated all night. It's not the best.
I've got the bed cooler too.
Oh,
what is that?
The Oola.
Oh, the
Ula.
The
Okay,
8 sleep, I think it's the same thing. Same
It's
sort
8
of
sleep.
thing.
Yeah.
But
I had that guy on Crate Lab. If anyone's interested, you can listen to how it works, how it regulates the sleep through temperature. But
And that's good too.
Boys, I'll say mine really quickly. If you finish yours, Jack. Did you finish yours? All right, cool. Yeah, so mine is basically, the summary is, after COVID, I went way off the wagon for a long time, was going too hard. You know me, I'm pretty all or nothing sort of person. So I'm doing the complete opposite right now. I'm like 2 months into like cleaning everything up, pretty much just drinking water mostly. Apart from when Trung and I got to catch up.
Let's talk about that after you finish your story.
But similar. But I mean, the 4 pillars are basically like, sleep, food, nutrition, movement, and stress. And so the first 3, I think my stress levels are pretty good already. I've injured my knee and my ankles.
Shit.
And so I'm like limited and like I can't lift weights as much as I'd like to right now, but I've basically doing what I can. So I'm like playing tennis now. I've started playing this game called Paddle, which is like tennis and squash put together, which is sick. And I'm eating super clean right now, like 1,800 calories a day. I put everything in MyFitnessPal. I've cut like 12 pounds in weight right now. I'm going way more than that. Probably need another like 20 because was way off the bandwagon. So I need to cut and then build up muscle again. But that's the kind of phase I'm in right now. So it's honestly the big thing for me personally. I've done this a few times before, but a lot of people like overcomplicate, like you said. But sometimes, like the simple part sometimes isn't enough either. So for example, if you're trying to cut weight, like a lot of people be like, oh, calories in, calories out, that's all that matters. And to a certain extent is still very important. But for a lot of people, if you're going from like not the best lifestyle to that, it's too hard to do. You can't just go to 1,700 calories, right? So you kind of need to learn a bit more about like food and how it impacts you hormonally, appetite wise, etc. So the summary is, after hundreds of hours of listening and learning about this stuff, is just eat great protein, eat vegetables most of your meals, eggs, good quality protein. And honestly, that for most people is probably going to work pretty well. And drink lots of water, and get to sleep, like you said. So that's kind of the summary. But it really, like, I'm literally doing extreme stuff. Like, I'm wearing a continuous glucose monitor. I'm doing the Oura Ring. I'm like putting everything in MyFitnessPal. I've got like everything just because I like to geek out over it, and it helps me. But for most people, they don't need to do that. So that's kind of my situation right now. Trying to play tennis.
Kettlebells are great.
Kettlebells, the move.
Kettlebells are good. We know Jack's got a couple there, and he's
got a couple. Yeah,
always mixing and matching where the seed phrase is. Which ones?
Exactly.
Yeah, so no one knows. Split one side each. All right. Next question. I know Trung was excited to share this. This is from Max Widmer. I don't know if I'm saying your surname correctly.
Widmer
Max.
brothers.
Widmer brothers. I was going to say.
Nick and
These
Max.
guys are NI legends. We've spoken to them in the DMs and stuff. Max asked, what is the most impactful book you've each read, fiction or non-fiction, all-time favorite movie? And I'm going to throw in the podcast since we were talking about earlier.
Oh, great question. Great question.
I feel like you got a few for us, Trung. You want to go first?
I'm not going to bombard people with recommendations. So my favorite writer is Christopher Hitchens. British writer. You guys know Christopher Hitchens, yeah? He's very probably 10, 15 years ago is way more well known. He's probably head of the atheist movement, but it's not the atheism stuff that interests me. It's more like, he is an incredible writer. He's like the type of writer where you're like, oh, you're reading, you're like, this guy's so fucking good. And this is like the North Star where you want to accomplish as somebody that wants to work in media. But like this, I mean, Christopher Hitchens like visited North Korea. He went to Iran. He went to Iraq. Like he was on the ground. For one article for Vanity Fair, he wanted to see what it felt to get waterboarded. So a CIA agent, literally, he asked the CIA agent, like, don't tell me when you're going to abduct me, like on the street, like give me the treatment. So like randomly was abducted from the street one day, given the full waterboard treatment just to see how bad it was. It's like, yeah, it was really fucking bad. But like, he's just an amazing writer, an amazing logical thinker, and he covers the breadth of his work is astounding. So the one book I'll say, that was all preamble to say, read his biography, Hitch 22. And the other one I'd recommend is his collection of essays, arguably is the name of it. And the reason I say that is he teaches you about history, but just like like if you want to know the gold standard of what it's like to do nonfiction writing as an essayist, he is that. And I mean, probably our generation's Orwell in that sense. And the last thing I'll say about his writing is, I totally forgot what I was going to say. I love Christopher Hitchens. Oh, this is what I was going to say. Sam Harris. I know Sam Harris is going through some issues right now. I don't know if you guys saw that, but he's like getting canceled on Twitter. We don't have to talk about it. But he was relaying some stories about hanging on Christopher Hitchens, and Christopher Hitchens did not have an Oura ring. Christopher Hitchens did not wear a whoop. He was blacking out, like partying till 5, 6 in the morning, and then writing like the greatest pieces of like English literature in the early 21st century.
Our boy Theo Von said when they asked what your favorite type of marijuana is. Have you heard this story?
Cocaine.
Yeah, because my favorite type of marijuana was cocaine. So good.
Christopher Hitchens, my answer. Well, you got to do the books, and then we'll hit the movies next. So
all right, great recommendation. I haven't read Hitch 22. I need to add that. Jack, what about you, mate?
I think that's a hard one. I don't really have one book. I actually rarely complete a whole book as well. Like I don't read that much nonfiction. I don't read that much fiction. That's a aspiration of mine to work that into the routine more. I think it's good for your imagination and vocabulary and all those good things.
Turns your brain off at night in a good way.
Yeah. Get you thinking about other stuff. So I'm going to do a book that influenced me the most, but before it was written, by our friend Eric Jorgenson, The Almanac of Naval. So a lot of the content that is in that book was very influential in my professional journey the last few years, and was fortunate enough to contribute some illustrations to that book. Yes, you were.
Incredible.
So if nobody's read that, it's free too. You can get it on, I think it's navalmanac.com. You can download
What's in it? Jack, tell the people what's in it.
So it's basically a organized collection of his writing and thinking, organized, I think, into 3 chapters: health, wealth, happiness. And just Eric did an incredible job on it, like worked on it for years and years and got it organized. And Naval gave it the blessing and provided all the material. Just a really amazing project. And I think Eric's working on the Balaji version of that right now.
Oh, man.
Would you say the Navalmanac is a perfect example of Permissionless Apprentice?
I would. It's in fact in the Permissionless Apprentice curriculum, my friend.
Okay, can you explain why it is the perfect example of Permissionless Apprentice?
Yeah, because it all happened without permission. This is not something I think Naval would have pursued himself based on what I know about him and what he's written. But Eric put a tweet out and said, I'm a huge student and admirer of everything you've written. I might compile this into a book. Who would be interested? It blew up. The tweet blew up. And I think Naval replied and said, yeah, whatever you need, just hit me up and we'll get the material to you. And he made it. And I think it's like #1 in a bunch of categories on Amazon still. And
I think, honestly, it's my most highlighted book.
It's an incredible book.
It's really, it's the amount of, if you like the style of Naval's tweets, is, the stuff he's shared in the past. It is very, it's just dense, dense with information like that. You're like, oh, that's a bar. Like, let me highlight that, save that. And again, not to plug all that stuff, but I did do almost 2 and a half, 2 hours with Eric Jorgenson on Create Lab talking about the best parts of the book, his favorite parts of the book. We call out a bunch of the concepts and stuff. So if you're interested, just Google Eric Jorgenson Create Lab. There's information there. And the cool thing is, I remember looking it up on Goodreads or Kindle, and it was Eric Jorgenson, Tim Ferriss, because I think he does the foreword, and Jack Butcher. And I was like, man, this is great company here for your boys. So definitely recommend that book. Anything else on that, Jack, before I can share something really quickly as well?
No.
Cool. Similar to Jack, I can't really pick one because it's really difficult. It's like one that's impacted me the most is really hard. So I'll adjust it slightly. It's more something I've read more recently that I found very interesting, which honestly, I'm not even sure most of our audience would find interesting, but I'm going to share it anyway. It was the one that I recently read. I was like, man, this is so different to something I've read before. It's called Inner City Pressure, The Story of Grime by Dan Hancock. I remember sending it to Jack when I read it. And for people that don't know, grime is a form of music that came out of London, UK, and something both me and Jack grew up listening to. We, really big fans of it. And the interesting thing here is, if you just want like a history lesson in like modern Britain, essentially, this is such an interesting take on it, because it storytells through music. You know, they're telling all these old stories that we know about, but then kind of overlaying this history layer, which honestly, I didn't know half of this stuff, even just growing up there. And it talks a lot about like immigration, the waves of immigration, which includes people like my parents come from Pakistan and people from the Caribbean, and just like this amazing story. It's kind of a story of London, of modern London, in my opinion. And you get these cool stories coming in and moments. It's interesting. It'll be interesting to see if someone who doesn't know much about grime would find it as interesting as I did. But if you know anything about that music, or interested, that was one I listened to, read recently, and really enjoyed it.
I love that.
Class.
And I will say, shout out to our friend Elijah, who listens to NIA. He's quoted in the book, actually. I'm pretty sure. So NIA listener in there. So let's go support our boy. Okay, last to wrap us up.
Hold on. Why don't we skip the movie? We want to do the podcast one, because the movies is too hard, man.
Yeah, movies. We're gonna say the same, like Goodfellas, Godfather.
I was gonna say Godfather. Well, the only thing I'll say about the movie one is my criteria for what is the most important. I mean, you can, right? You can't pick. It'd be like, if I had to watch a movie over and over again for the rest of my life, what would it be? It probably would be The Godfather, because there's so many layers. And but yeah, so podcast. Man, Hardcore History is Tim Ferriss's, I think, favorite podcast. I think it's Elon's favorite podcast. It's
Rogan
incredible.
As well. I think it's his favorite.
Yeah. It's not even a podcast. It's its own form of media. It's like
an audio book, interactive audio book almost.
It's like 5-hour long podcasts about historical topics, typically ones that involve war. If you've never heard Hardcore History, I just recommend listening to it. But the most recent one about Japan, the superpower from the East, supernova from the East, the rise of Japan leading up to World War II, and then the end of World War II. It's incredible. It's just incredible. It's like 20 hours of content, and you can't wait.
You have to pay for these ones, yeah?
No, the most recent ones are free. So that one's free, but the ones that are a bit older,
which is probably worth it.
Yeah, if you want to listen to an archive, let me just drop, if people are looking for content, is listen to Ghost of the Ostfront. That's the German versus Soviets in World War II. Insane. It's just absolutely insane. Killer.
Jack, you got one, mate?
I'm gonna have to skip this one. I'm the same I'm episode based. I'm not a subscriber to any given podcast stream, but that may change in the future. So we'll come back to it.
Yeah, fair enough.
Well, do you have a favorite episode?
No.
Okay.
Fair enough. All right. I think I might even skip as well, because I feel like mine are, it really depends on the mood. But I guess, I mean, honestly, mine are probably like old Rogan ones, which I would have to kind of think a little bit about. But there are a few old ones where I've listened to them a few times.
Give me one. Give us one.
Honestly, they're kind of boring for most people, but since we talked about the health stuff earlier, there's ones with like Peter Attia, Dr. Peter Attia, who now has his own podcast, Drive, Rhonda Patrick. There's a few of these like health people, which I learned so much. And honestly, it probably did have the most impact on me in a way as well. Actual physical impact and like learning wise and like actually trying to take myself in a certain direction. So I think those ones, there's probably some others that were more like philosophical. But yeah, I haven't listened to those ones for a little while. So yeah, I'd say a couple of those. And we're hitting time shortly.
Boys,
Jack, do you need to go?
Yeah, I'm going to revise my answer.
Yes.
There we go. Let's do it.
The Sailor series.
Oh, there we go.
What is money?
Wait, Robert Breedlove.
How can we forget that?
Yeah.
How can we forget that?
Crazy how I didn't come up with that. That's definitely my most listened. So, and incredibly hilarious. Produced and researched and just epic work. Robert Breedlove, shout out.
If you want to hear about goats on a mountain and apply it to Bitcoin, that's your move.
That's going to be a classic, man. I'm going to be listening to that in a retirement home, mate.
Yeah, that was a very, I mean, we joke about it a lot. For the listeners that don't know about the goat on the mountain, Jack, please explain to them the goat on the mountain.
I probably need to re-listen to it, but I believe it's like one of the first sentences in the What is Money podcast, which is essentially this massive production to try and describe what money is from first principles. And I believe that is a physics analogy where nature takes the fastest and most intelligent route through evolution, right? So a goat on the mountain, if an eagle is trying to eat a goat, all they'll do is go and pick it up by the shoulders and chuck it off the edge instead of getting into a scrap and wasting calories.
What a visual.
Yeah. So if you Google actually goat, mountain
listen,
goat,
I don't
eagle
want to
or
get
something.
clipped. People clipping me and throwing it on Twitter, like, listen, Trung's like at Glee at a goat getting thrown off the mountain. I'm laughing that the explanation for why Bitcoin will become $100 trillion asset starts with a goat on a mountain.
We got to go back that far to get
Well, actually, you guys will laugh. You guys remember when our boy Packy was getting dragged on Twitter over his thoughts about mortgages on the blockchain? I texted him. I'm like, Packy, you made the biggest mistake of anybody in content. If you're talking about crypto, you have to start with goats on the mountain. You can't get dragged into the weeds.
You can't be trying to talk real sense.
You can't get dragged into the weeds on this, buddy. Goats on the mountain, 50,000 foot level, storytelling. Let's go back to it. There we go. So anyways.
Jack, you need to bounce now, yeah? How you doing for time?
Yeah. I'm going to shoot, boys. Thanks for...
That's good. Do we have any good questions?
I got one or two just for you, actually, that we can... If you've got 5 minutes, we can keep going.
Let's just do Trunk
without
Stunner.
Jack, but
fan zone.
Yeah,
we'll finish it off without you, Jack. Thanks for
We do know how much I love talking.
Yeah, there we go. So just a couple more. So this one was quite a funny one from Logan, but I think it's actually an interesting question because a lot of people ask this. Logan said, personal question for Trung, was your MBA worth it? Would you do it again / recommend doing an MBA to others? I have some thoughts too, but it's to you, so you hit it.
I would not do my MBA again. The criteria for doing an MBA should be, are you getting into top 15 or 20 school? I think that's it. Otherwise, it
and
also
even then, it still depends, no? Or you say if you can get in top 20, it's worth it?
If you can get in top 10 school, it's probably worth it. What
if you already went to a top 10 school for undergrad?
Okay,
you still think it adds a lot of value?
What Bilal is pointing out here is that, fully contextual, right? You're making a great point. So let me explain why I did my MBA, all right? I did my MBA because I lived in Vietnam for 5 years, getting hammered and doing nothing with my life. And I made my now wife leave a very cushy, high-paying corporate job in Southeast Asia to move to a continent she did not know anyone. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to have to do some proper corporate laddering to make her like a sacrifice here worth it. So I had two options: was go where I had like my time in Southeast Asia was not worth very much to North America, right? So I'm like, okay. Like get an MBA, that'll probably be the easiest route to reintegrate into North American society, corporate-wise. I hadn't discovered Twitter by then, so if I had, it'd be a totally different game.
To contextualize,
2014.
Yeah, so it's still a different world.
So yeah, if I was hitting Twitter in 2014 and doing what I do now, it'd be game over. But I didn't because I don't have the foresight. So that was my reason to do the MBA. So looking back, I wouldn't do it because I didn't need it, right? In any capacity, what I'm doing now, but that's obviously hindsight's 2020. So it's all contextual. It's like, what's the reason you're doing the MBA, right? If it's a top 10 school, I would say it's probably worth it, even if you have the brand name undergrad, Bilal, to answer your question, because those schools are just, the opportunity set and the network is insane. So if you can get in the top 10, it's probably worth it. Otherwise, you're going to have to start these other considerations that we have is like, what do you actually want to do? Could you build your brand separate from the school? It might take a little bit longer, but then you'll save yourself $300,000 opportunity cost if you're going to a US school. So what I would say is the need to do it is probably less now because you can make yourself a commodity in the job market if that's what you want to do. Those avenues are all available. And the opportunity cost is just so massive. It's just such a, in the States, right? Particularly the States, a top 20 to 30 school in the States, that's going to cost you, including tuition, $400,000
$300,000 or $400,000. Crazy.
Yeah. And they tell you that, you'll make that over the earning of your life. But it's like, well, actually, going back to what we spoke about earlier, can you build your own brand without it? And in that case, no, it wouldn't be worth it. Yeah. And that's what I would say.
So, and I think that's perfectly put. I would say, just personally, because I did business and I went to a business school undergrad basically, and a lot of my friends ended up going and doing MBAs and stuff. And I know people from Google and other worlds that have done this a lot. And even in my old team, a girl in my team, I helped to with a recommendation, all that sort of stuff for it. So know a little bit about the process and the costs and the considerations. My personal opinion is, if you want to start a company, I don't think it's something I would personally recommend with that lens, which is something I always think about. It doesn't mean you can't go to Wharton and start Warby Parker like those guys did, or whatever.
Or Stanford HBS, right? But that's like the top
and even
tier,
then,
right?
it's a small percentage of the people, right? Like they're all successful people on paper, depending on what you count as success. But I'm saying specifically, if you're someone who wants to start a company, honestly, with a new environment too, when you're doing it in the 2010s, you went to Stanford, is a little bit different. You're still going to be fine. But if you do a Stanford MBA and you've got like a good background before, and you go to raise money in Silicon Valley, you got a decent chance of being able to get to that next round and surviving. Whereas I think the environment's a little bit different now. But specifically, if you're in consulting, investment banking, finance, or some sort of banking, finance, even accountancy, stuff like that, plenty reason to do it. If you want to be a
corporate guy, do that.
Exactly, it's corporate. Yeah, and there's nothing wrong with that. Like, you're going to make money, you're going to rise up the ranks. One of my friends was an interesting example where he worked at Google with me for a while, worked in media before that, wanted a change, didn't really know what to do, and he did that. He went for 2 years and ended up joining the NBA, like basketball, right?
Awesome.
And he went as a more senior, and that was quite a cool move, though he got there for a year and was like, man, this is so slow, and ended up at Facebook anyway, kind of in a role he probably could have got anyway, to be honest. And I've seen that which again, like, he's fine, he earns plenty of money.
It's all dependent. That's the answer.
All dependent.
It's all dependent. I'm just giving, again, I would not do it again.
The summary is, if you want to do corporate, you want to stay in big companies, 100% it can help you, but I don't think you need to do it to get to that stage nowadays. If you're someone who's really interested in like startups and smaller stuff, I mostly think it's not in your favor. I think people respect it. As someone who's hired people with MBAs too, it wasn't something that stood out on a page to me. Right. I was like, oh, that's cool, you're smart, but like, what else did you do? So that other stuff was more important to me.
Did you have a blog about English football teams?
Yeah. No, there's actually one guy that went to Cornell, I think, at Cornell, and I hired him, and he had a blog. He had like these side projects.
Amazing.
Which, seriously, I was very interested in that.
Side projects is more interesting than MBA, to be honest, right? It shows that you're a self-starter and you're like, you actually care about stuff, right? Like, get an MBA, it's like, do you actually care about what you're being taught in an MBA program? It's like, no, not really, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Like, do I care about portfolio theory? I don't. That's the answer. It's a rhetorical question.
100%. All right, we could probably wrap it up, but the last question, since we didn't get to ask Jack this, but this was since last time, we got to ask about barbecue. Dustin said, what type of barbecue do you like? Jack is in barbecue country. Maybe we can ask him next time. I don't know if you have an answer to this.
Dude, I gotta say, I had this conversation with the missus. Asian barbecue is very underrated.
Woo, yeah, that's true.
The Korean barbecue game, fresh. The Japanese barbecue game, fresh.
Love it.
Them Filipinos will roll 30 deep to the park and be cooking up something in the. Dude, that's literally in Vancouver. You go to any park.
Oh my God.
There's going to be a congregation of dozens of Filipinos making some delicious barbecue.
I agree.
That's probably not the barbecue answer people are looking for, but
and you can't really buy it in the store. There's not. Well, you can do the Korean barbecue.
Korean H-Mart has all the pre-marinated stuff, right? But like, man, if you're talking about barbecue, yeah, like stuff down south, you can't lose, right?
Yeah, it's hard to beat. I will
say the Asian stuff, and this isn't surprising, it's much lighter. Like, you won't leave an Asian barbecue being like, oh. Yeah,
it's not the same. Yeah, no, I mean, if you're in New York, like if you go up to Koreatown, there's a place in East Village I used to go that was a block from me. Called Yakiniku West, which I think I sent you a picture. That is like the real, like, I mean, they changed it. You used to go and take your shoes off and go and sit down and like get this really cool experience as well. But now they just turned it into a normal restaurant.
Any restaurant that has a heating element at the table, I fuck with that. Like, exactly. If you got a heating element,
intestines on the menu.
Yeah, Trung hits the intestines. I have zero qualms about that.
And actually, the last thing I add, you mentioned the Asian barbecues. I'm also Asian, a different form of Asian, Pakistani.
South Asian, brother.
And I will say my favorite barbecue, honestly, is my dad. A Pakistani barbecue is something also very underrated. You get the kebabs, like this I don't even know what you say in English, but like the long ones, they're kind of like Middle Eastern style. You would have had them, and you get like lamb chops, like baby lamb chops, like these tiny little ones. Jesus Christ, that is hard to beat. You get a little chutney on the side, a little naan, a little bit of greens. Yeah, it's the move. All right, boys, I think we can. All right, Trunk. I think we can call it here. We went a few minutes over because
that's perfect. That
Jack
was awesome.
had to leave, but that was great. Let us know what you think of this. If you're listening on YouTube, I know a lot of you have just found this for the first time in the last month or so. Check out some of our archives. We've got lots of cool conversations. We've got 2-3 other AMAs like this as well. And if you prefer to listen like most people do, you can go on Spotify, Apple, any podcast app. Find us there. Just search Not Investment Advice. And we appreciate all your support, spreading the word, and we will see you next week. Cheers.
Peace.